Welcome to Love in the Wild, the podcast where healing gets real, dating can be complicated, and self-love is the main character energy we're all here for. I'm your host, Caitlin Ansari, recovering people pleaser, expert red flag spotter, and your personal cheerleader through every glow-up, breakdown, and late-night overthinking spiral. Every week, we're diving into love, heartbreak, boundaries, and the wild ride of becoming that girl. Healed, happy, and unbothered. So grab your matcha, your journal, or just your AirPods. Because around here, we don't chase love, we become it. All right, in today's episode of Love in the Wild, it's all about reframing the way we see love. My guest on today's episode is relationship coach Dean Blankfield, and we are here to challenge the myths around attachment styles. So if you think avoidant means cold and anxious means clingy, you don't want to miss this real talk conversation that may be keeping you from finding deeper, secure love. Dean helps us look beneath the surface to see real fears and desires driving these dynamics and how we can understand them to open doors to a more secure and lasting love. If you've ever felt misunderstood or struggled to understand your partner, this episode will change the way you see relationships. So let's flip the script and dive into reframing love, where avoidant isn't cold and anxious isn't needy. So a little intro about our podcast host today. Dean is a relationship coach who specializes in attachment patterns. He has helped people stuck in painful relationship dynamics, understanding themselves and becoming more secure. He has coached hundreds of anxious and avoidant attachers and is known for making attachment easy to understand and practical to implement. Dean has a way of using stories and metaphors that speak to the heart instead of dry theory. All right, Dean, I am so happy to have you on. Can you briefly intro yourself and then go right into just the basics of what the attachment styles are?
Well, it's great to be here for our second conversation. Unfortunately, the first one wasn't recorded, but hopefully this will live up to expectations. You did a great job. That's a summary of what I do. I've been in the relationship space for a long time, been coaching hundreds of people from all around the world. And I guess, people come to me when they're just stuck. They're suffering. They don't know what to do. They've tried everything. They've gone to different therapies. They've read all the books. They've gone to seminars. And for whatever reason, most of their life is sorted, but the relationships are just causing so much pain. And so they're just at their wits' end. They don't know what to do. And then they sit in front of me and say, what's wrong with me? And that's kind of where I start digging into the patterns and figuring out what are they doing? How are they playing a role in their own suffering and causing these painful relationship dynamics over and over again? And a lot of the time, it's like a 2mm shift. When you see the pattern clearly, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so the moment I reflect back to them what's going on and they see it, then they just need a little bit of courage to change their behavior, choose a different direction. That's a simplified version, but essentially that's kind of what I do.
That is wonderful. And that's why I kind of was drawn to your page, because I'm living in retrospect here where I felt very similar. I mean, I'm a great mom. I have a great career, but I was running into the same relationship pattern over and over again. And, I didn't find you in that time, but I was like, what is going on? And I found out that it was more, not that it was more me, but it was little things that I was doing that were sabotaging my own relationship. So I was like, I keep going after the same person. I keep, running into the same habits. And I was like, okay, before I do anything else and start dating anybody else, I was like, I need therapy. I need to like uncover all of these little things. So can you briefly explain what like an anxious attacher is, what an avoidant attachment is? And I know there's little like micro categories within those, correct?
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because that is very vulnerable in itself. And I relate to that. I was single for a long time, and I had the illusion that, all right, I just need to change the person who I was dating, the color of hair, the job, what nationality they were, tall, short, like whatever it is. It was always like, can I change the external environment because something wasn't working? Little did I know that they were just reflecting back to me my own issues, and I'm the one they needed to change. And the moment I did, they started changing. Funny how that works. But what you explained is, it's the key to attachment theory. For me, attachment theory is a tool. It's supposed to be used not to keep you stuck, not to label you, not to minimize who you are as a person, not to put you in a box, but to make you understand where you are. And once you know where you are, there's a clear path to getting where you want to go, right? The whole point of having a label is to understand yourself on a deeper level, and then to get out of the label. Because if you just stay with the label it's going to keep you stuck in relationships in your own life. It's not a great place to be. So essentially, there's 4 attachments. There's the anxious attachment, there's the dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant, and secure attachment style. And when we come into the world as a baby, we're pretty much perfect. We come with our own nature, own character and personality, but somewhere along the lines, who we were wasn't good enough for our caregivers, because our caregivers wanted us to be more quiet, don't complain. They neglected us on some level, not to their fault, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And when that starts to happen over and over again, we start developing insecurities that who we are is not good enough. So I have to be something else in order to get love and affection from the people around us. So you start developing these insecure attachments, which is anxious, dismissive, fearful. If someone's got a secure attachment, it means the majority of the time when they needed support, when they needed connection, when they needed that emotional support, for majority of the time they got it. So they developed the belief that who I am is good enough. I'm good. I can rely on my connection. Things are good. But for the rest of us who didn't get that, and again, it's no fault of our caregivers, it's just the way things happen. They were passed down their insecurities from their caregivers and so on and so forth. It just gets passed down the generations. We start developing insecurities around relationships. Anxious, I'll just do it simply because there's so much attachment theory theory out there and content out there that it can be a bit dry, but essentially the anxious attachment is when there was an inconsistent response from their caregivers. Sometimes they got it, sometimes they didn't. So the nervous system starts feeling anxious and wired up. Am I going to get that response or not? And they started feeling anxious around connection. They weren't sure when they were going to get it. It was inconsistent. The dismissive avoidant, they were continuously neglected. When they needed support, when they needed connection, they were neglected. Either they were put in their room or their caregivers put their own needs ahead of the child's needs. So they started developing this belief, and their nervous system was like, it's too risky to rely on people. It's too risky to get close. It's too risky to feel emotions because there's no one there. So I'm just going to shut it down. I'm not going to allow myself to get close to anyone else. The fearful avoidant is kind of a combination of the two, but a lot more intense. So essentially, they a lot of the time experience trauma. So the caregivers who's supposed to provide support, connection, safety, were also a source of trauma, abuse, all that sort of stuff. So their nervous system goes into overdrive and they don't know what to expect. So they are very almost erratic and confusing in the way that they go about things. Yeah.
There is so much to unpack with that. And I think, I'm going to go back to the very beginning where, you were like, our attachment style is our label. It doesn't necessarily like categorize us in like who we are, but it's a way to understand like this is how I need to navigate through the world, or this is understanding that this is who I am, but this is also how I show up in relationships. So this is how I need to either shift or, relate to somebody. And these are just like almost like benchmarkers for ourselves, right? Like, so in that kind of dynamic, like what does social media like have to play in kind of like those labels? Like I've seen, avoidant attachers are terrible and anxious attachers are kind of like the fawn, kind of like poor me. And, when I see those, because I'm naturally more of an avoidant personality or like attachment, I would say, no shame to my parents. I think they're amazing, but I was raised that, emotions are kind of something you stuff down. And so that's how I do things. I think I'm more of like the dismissive avoidant. And so when I see kind of these relationships where, or like these things on social media where it's like, oh, avoidance are so bad. I'm like, shoot, like maybe, I'm really bad. Maybe I'm a really bad person. But the way you kind of framed it is, no, that's your benchmark, and how you move forward is how you should handle life.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Social media it's a double-edged sword. On some way, it's beautiful and it allows us to have these conversations and learn many things about many aspects of life. But on the other hand, it's got an unhealthy side, a very toxic side, especially when it comes to attachment theory. For me, real healing happens when we see our own role in our suffering. And the more we point fingers and blame the external environment, the government's the reason why I'm broke, it's the food that they think, that's why I'm overweight, it's the avoidance out there, that's why I'm miserable. The more we do that, we disempower ourselves, because in order for us to be happy and secure and empowered, everything else has to change on the outside. And that becomes a very disempowered place to be. So social media can be a double-edged sword, like I said before. But I think avoidant attachers don't do themselves justice. The way that they go about things, and by the way, I relate more to avoidant tendencies than anything else as well. I spend some time feeling very anxious. But if I really reflect on that, it's probably because I was going for people who weren't that interested in me, and it was making me anxious, right? So natural consequence. But I've had to do a hell of a lot of work on my avoidant tendencies. For a very long time, I was pretty unavailable, shut down, all the good stuff, and it didn't make it fun for the people I was dating at the time. But, I don't feel guilty or shameful or anything about that anymore, because I realized, well, that's all I knew at the time. How was I supposed to do anything different? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm 35. Gosh, I'm 36. Never mind. But like when, it took me, I think till I was like 34, 35 to realize my attachment style. Like you
Yeah.
had mentioned, I thought I was more on the anxious side, but
Mm,
I was only anxious for people that I was chasing after, that I was
yeah.
like really attached to the outcome. I was like, no, this is the person, without looking at the actual like meat of it and being like, this person doesn't like me.
Yeah.
And so now I'm in a very healthy relationship, and it's almost like the hardest thing,
The
because it's
hardest.
like pulling up all those insecurities. Whereas, unhealthy, toxic relationships, I'm like, oh, that's them, or that's my attachment, or, there's like a reason to point blame on different things,
Mhm.
because there are like, it's a problem and there's, reasons for everything. But in a healthy
Can I just
relation,
add to that as
yeah.
well? Because I relate to exactly what you're saying. When we are running insecure tendencies and patterns and behaviors, even though it's hurtful and we feel lonely and sometimes we feel shameful and beat ourselves up for not being able to function in a relationship or hurting other people or pushing them away, it is on some level comfortable because it's familiar to us. But the moment we start working through that and become more secure in ourselves and find a more secure relationship, that is when the rubber hits the road, because it is that uncomfortable, it is difficult. And that's when all the deep stuff comes up, because, a lot of the time when you date someone who's on some level emotionally unavailable or inconsistent or not ready for a relationship, there's only a certain level to how hurt you can get, because somewhere deep inside you, it's not going to work out. You've experienced this before. It's happened. You know how it starts, you know the middle, and you know the end, right? But when you meet someone who's present, who's available, who's there, well, there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to run. And all these survival strategies and coping mechanisms and protections and everything that we develop to keep us safe have to start being shed, because they won't accept that. They will hold space for you and look it straight through your eyes into your soul and say, show me who you are. And that's terrifying, because you need vulnerability and it's risky, very risky. And so I really feel that there's two phases to healing. One, it's to start working on these insecurities, these protection mechanisms, survival strategies that we develop to keep us safe. But then, how can we stay with someone who's good for us? That is 5 times harder than the first one, I found in my life anyway.
I completely agree with you. And I read a quote that really resonated with me, and I don't even remember where I read it, but it was, are you healed, or are you avoiding the triggers that upset you? And I was
Yeah.
like, because for a while I was, I did my therapy. And so I felt like my circle of like physical, mental, financial, emotional health was, pretty good. I was like, I'm going to therapy. So that was like the last kind of pillar I needed to work on.
Yeah.
But then I wasn't going out. I wasn't like engaging with other people, either like friendships, romantic, whatever. And I was like, I read that and I was like,
Oh my
okay,
God. So true. This is what I'm saying. It's like you can go live in the Himalayas for 18 years and learn to meditate and be calm and wise and peaceful and equanimous. Equanimous. I don't know that words. Anyway, but the moment you take that skill set and go into a difficult
Oh,
situation, you wanna
hang on. Oliver, I'm on a meeting. Okay, you're okay. Oh,
good.
we're good. He'll be fine.
Okay. That's what we're saying. Yes, it's easy to be calm and peaceful when you're living in the Himalayas practicing meditation, but go sit at a dinner table with a mother-in-law that you don't like and who triggers the hell out of you, then we'll see what's really there and what's underneath the surface. And the same with relationships. People come to me all the time and they're doing the work on themselves, which is wonderful and I commend it, but they're not in a relationship and they're not dating. So they won't really know what's under the surface because, you can learn to swim. You can go get a degree on swimming. You can spend 20 years understanding all the different strokes, but until you get in the water, you won't be able to develop the muscles and the capacity to deal with swimming. You don't
I
know what's there.
love that analogy. Like, you talk about doing things through metaphors and analogies, and that is a great one.
Yeah,
You could read every book you need on swimming, but unless you actually do it, you're not there.
yeah,
And I know I responded to one of your questions on Instagram of like, being more avoidant. And I think this goes for being avoidant and anxious as well. But like, what do you do? Because I'm in a secure relationship. And so I have these moments where I'm fully just like almost like incapacitated, where I'm like, oh my gosh, and like freeze because I
and
feel my avoidant tendencies coming in. And it's nothing that this person's doing. And to our past conversation, like toxic relationships, I could say, oh, this person's doing this, so it's triggering this in me.
yeah.
And so he's not doing anything. The relationship is great, but what can I do or anyone who's listening do when they kind of feel those anxious or avoidant triggers coming in?
So why do you think you freeze?
Because it's like a micro step into more vulnerability. I'm like, "Oh, we're getting closer, we're building more, we're getting a deeper relationship. Nothing's wrong. Like, why is nothing wrong? There should be something. I'm like, my brain just goes into overdrive. I'm a natural overthinker
Yeah,
and I'm constantly trying to solve a problem. But if there's no problem there, my brain
there
is
is a
like,
problem.
oh, so
There's
we
a
just
problem.
chill, we hang out.
But there's a deep problem in your nervous system is reacting not even to your partner, but to your caregivers or whatever happened to you in childhood. It can't differentiate between the two. So you think there's no problem in your mind, but your nervous system is saying there's a problem here. Like we're getting too close. You're getting too close to the fire that burns you. That's risky because when
Mm.
I get close, when I get seen for who I truly am, when I'm authentic, when I allow myself to love and be loved, now this is the major risk because then I'm now susceptible to rejection, abandonment, hurt, all the things. And imagine if someone doesn't like me for who I really am behind all the walls and all the masks. That's painful. But if they don't like me for this very polished, well put together person, yeah, it hurts, but they're kind of, it's like insulting the picture on the wall. Yeah, it's your picture, but it's not you.
Yeah. And it does save you a lot of time down the road, if you're like, I used to be that person where I was like, keep it all together. And
Hmm.
then the slightest moment of, being my like true inner authentic self,
Yeah,
it was like, I don't really know.
it's
And
risky,
it's risky, but I look back and I'm like, that saved me a lot of time and a
of
lot more
course.
heartbreak.
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah,
it costs you more to get off the train when you reach your destination because you got to go all the way back. But
yeah.
if you hop off in the middle and you just roll off, kind of saves you, even though it hurts.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where, so you ask me like what needs to change. Well, firstly, you have to be aware of your tendencies and what you normally do. What's happening in the body? What am I reacting to? Because you say there's no threat, but your nervous system says otherwise. And so noticing that and understanding that, and then in the moment, having the courage to choose vulnerability every time because it's more comfortable to avoid. It's more comfortable to turn away, to shut down, to leave the relationship, to convince yourself that there's something wrong with this person, right? That's the avoidant tendency. That's what we normally do. So the difficult thing is to face what you're avoiding. How can I stay when I normally run? How can I be vulnerable and express exactly what's happening for me, even though it's uncomfortable, and give myself a chance for connection? Otherwise, I'm just going to be lonely and repeat the same cycle over and over and over and over again. I use the metaphor for the avoidant attacher. In Greek mythology, there was a king, Tantalus. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but
Mm-mm.
Tantalus, he pissed off the gods, and the gods condemned him to stand in a puddle and around him were fruit trees. And every time he reached for a fruit, because he was hungry, the trees bent backwards and got out of the way. And every time he bent over to get some water, the water disappeared into the ground. And that's kind of how it feels to date and avoid an attacher. They're just out of reach. You know, they're there, you can see it, you can smell it. But the moment you reach for it, they pull away and they disappear. And it can be incredibly debilitating and painful. And so for you, and for me and anyone else who has avoidant tendencies, the trick is not to lean away and not to let the water disappear when you get close to something that you want. And that's difficult. It's not easy because, again, you're putting yourself at risk to being hurt, like deeply hurt for who you are. But there's no joy in leaving all the time. Just it's a lonely road.
And I don't know if this is right, but when I do feel those things, I always just text him. Like, he never knows, and he'll probably listen to this podcast. But like when I have those moments, my response is now I'll just say something nice. Like I'll say something like a reason why I love him or a reason I'm feeling like I want to just not talk to him for a couple hours. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to send you something really nice. Like I'm just going to text you something nice and put my phone away.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful.
It's like my kind of coping, I suppose.
And you're interrupting the pattern. The pattern is right now you're not safe. It's time to go. There's something wrong in the dynamic. And you're interrupting it by saying, hold on a sec, let's do something different. Let's choose a new behavior. And that strengthens the relationship. And hopefully, eventually you'll get to the point where you're like, you know what? I'm struggling right now. I'm starting to freeze. I feel my system shutting down. And normally I'm going to disappear. Normally I would send you something nice, but I just wanted to let you know where I'm at. I still love you.
That's a good and calm way to respond. And it makes me wonder. So, the avoidant attachment is, the water pulling away, the tree pulling away. But what is the kind of anxious avoidant dynamic? Because typically those two attachments find each other more often than not. Is that correct?
They will always find each other. I'd argue that every single relationship you look at has an element of anxious and avoidant dynamics. It's the nature of life. Everything tries to find balance in the universe. If your system gets too cold, it's going to heat up to try and get back to homeostasis. So everything's seeking balance, and a relationship is an organism that's also seeking balance. If someone comes to a relationship and there's someone who is anxious 5 out of 10, for argument's sake, and the other person is, more secure, 0 out of 10, like they're in smack bang in the middle, then the anxious is going to push for connection, push for reassurance, push. And eventually they're at 5 out of 10. The secure is going to be like, and pull back 5 out of 10 to make balance, or they'll come meet at 3 out of 10 each, right? So everything tries to seek some sort of balance in a relationship dynamic. Whenever I coach someone, if they come to me within the first 2 minutes, if they tell me what is happening for them, I will predict with a pretty high accuracy the whole relationship dynamic, because I know if they are avoidant, pushing away, shutting down the moment there's conflict, stress, whatever it is, I know the other person's anxious. It's just a consequence of the dynamic. If someone comes to me and they're like, can't stop thinking, I'm overthinking, they're not messaging me back, that energy is, the other person's going to be like, push away naturally. So it's this push and pull, right? But these relationship dynamics, when you start getting on the more severe end, are the most painful, debilitating relationships ever, because they're talking two different languages. The anxious is talking in one way and communicating about their needs, but it's not landing because the avoidant attacher doesn't understand it. They don't relate to it. It's completely the opposite of how they experience the relationship. And then the avoidant attacher is talking in their own language and trying to communicate what's going on. Even though they don't say much, they're still communicating in their behavior and their energy and everything. And the anxious attacher just doesn't get it at all. So there's two people operating from a place of fear and insecurity, expecting the other person to understand them, and that causes so many issues in the relationship. And the key is to understand the self. Don't worry about the other. It's going to figure itself out. When you understand the self, when you realize that life and relationships is a journey of the self, not the other, and you start changing and you start moving towards vulnerability, then the whole dynamic has to change. It can't stay the same.
I love that because, it really is an inside job. And
Inside job.
It kind of makes me wonder, what are some boundaries? How do you, as an anxious attacher or an avoidant attacher, hold true to your boundaries while still being able to understand being a little vulnerable, but communicating those things? I truly don't know the answer, but how do you kind of set your boundaries, knowing which ones are out of fear, knowing which ones are personal and core to maybe your morale, but still meeting the other person in the middle, I suppose?
Well, It's a journey of the self. It's when you get to know yourself on a very deep level. Awareness is the cornerstone of change. If you don't know what's happening for you, if you don't know if you're doing something out of fear and insecurity, or you're doing it out of authenticity and vulnerability, you're never going to be able to navigate the relationship. So the first point of call is to figure out what's happening for me. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this to get a response? Am I doing this to push them to see if they still love me? And what am I doing this for? Vulnerability, right? If you think about it, if you draw a line in the sand, it's risky because the other person can say no, or they can leave the relationship. So that's a form of vulnerability as well. And I think the journey with all of this sort of stuff, communication, communicating your needs, boundaries, all this sort of stuff is about being vulnerable. Because when you get to know yourself and when you understand how to communicate what's happening for you, you see, the problem is the anxious and the avoidant attachment both have the same problem. They both avoid vulnerability. They both avoid what they need to do. They don't know how to understand exactly what's happening for them under the surface. They don't know how to communicate their needs. They don't even know what they do need. So they use these survival strategies and protection mechanisms to communicate. And all that does is push the other person away because it comes from a place of fear. And the energy is, it's insecure energy, right? So like whenever someone comes and works with me, I'm like, forget about all the tricks and the tools and what to say and how to say. No, get out of your head and into your heart and tell me what's happening below the adaptation, below the survival strategy. And when they can get out of the details and into the body and into the core and into the heart, everything else sorts itself out. They don't even need to think about boundaries or anything.
I'm at a loss for words. Like there was so many like good nuggets in that where I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Like all of it. I mean, I feel like that one little paragraph sums up everything we were trying to get from this podcast. But like,
Let me give you an example,
okay,
right? My life. I was single for 8 years. I've been in a relationship for 4.5 now. And for a long time, I thought there was something seriously wrong with me. Could not figure out what was going on. And like I said, part of my adaptation was I thought it was externally. So I kept changing who I was dating, like nationality, profession, all the things. But the same thing was always happening. The ones that I liked didn't like me, and the ones that I didn't like liked me. It was like, and that is the classic pattern of insecure wound from childhood, right? But what I realized on this journey is that when I was going out and dating, I was putting across this front, this mask, this persona, this character who protected the soft part of myself. So I will put this person across. The problem was one or two things happened. Either they liked that refined person who was masterful at everything. Either they liked that person, which caused me to be stuck because I had to keep up the facade. I can't change, if they like the person for who I'm not, I've got to keep that up. That is exhausting. Or they didn't like me and they moved on with their life. Either way, it's a lose-lose. So I had to go on this journey of self-reflection and introspection and start having a hard conversation with myself. I'm like, what am I avoiding? Doesn't matter if you're anxious, if you're fearful, if you're dismissive, you have to turn towards what you're avoiding. I was avoiding vulnerability, which all the insecure attachments are. And I made a decision. I'm like, well, if I keep doing this, I'm going to be single for another 8 years, another 10 years, but I want a relationship. Even saying I want a relationship was difficult for me. I just wouldn't tell anyone, yeah, I'm not sure what I was looking for. Maybe we'll see. I'm busy. Work's busy, right? But I had to have a hard conversation and start saying, you know what? Let's put a sentence to it. I'm looking for a relationship. Okay. What's the problem? The problem is I have all these mechanisms and strategies to be successful on a date, but no one can connect with me because they're connecting with a wall. The connectivity happens behind the wall. I was plugging in a lamp into the electrical socket, but it had a plastic cable. There was no juice. And so I made a decision. I'm going to do the difficult thing. On date number 1, I'm going to express vulnerability. I'm going to say, I'm nervous, or I'm actually looking for something serious, or don't say that on a first date, And what happened is that the unavailable people, the highly avoidant people, the people who weren't ready to commit, they are repelled by it. They repelled. They don't know what to do with vulnerability. They don't want it. That's not what they're there for. But the good people were attracted to it. They were sucked to it. So all of a sudden, I had these good options, and I started connecting with people on a deeper level because I got behind the wall, made a decision which was difficult, and now I've been in a long-term relationship for almost 5 years.
well, congratulations, because listening to your story, like I feel like we had the same roadmap. Like I'm like,
I feel sorry for you then.
it feels very familiar. And, I had a similar thing where it was like, I had a realization where I was like, I'm either going to work on myself and figure out my why and what I actually really want, or I'm going to continue repeating the same pattern and continue being hurt. It was
Yeah.
like I either jump in the pool and I get hurt, or I stay
Mhm.
outside of the pool and I get hurt. But I've stayed outside of the pool and I've gotten hurt. So what's going to happen if I just jump in? Like
E
I'm going to get hurt either way. But
either
like
way.
one might be healthy, one might not be. And you had mentioned something about like being in your head and understanding why. And I feel like that relates to so many things. Like when you do an action or you have a feeling, even maybe, I've been anxious in relationships where I've been posting so much online. And I
Yeah.
was like, why am I actually doing this? It was, I was posting the selfie to get his attention, or I was posting the flowers to make sure all the other girls were like, she's with him. Like understanding the why,
Mhm.
I feel like is like the core, I feel like roadmap, so to
Yeah.
speak, for understanding yourself and healing. And I know you had mentioned on like our previous call, but when you work with somebody, you
Mhm.
know immediately, like you kind of know who they are, how they're showing up in relationships. Can you explain a little bit more? Because I know people are going to want to work with you and,
Yeah.
you already have that track record. But after this podcast comes out, like kind of what that journey is. And I know that there's a really short time frame of like when you feel like you can get somebody on the right track.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think for every single person, the journey is the same. And like you've mentioned many times, and for both of us, we have to realize and understand our own part in the situations. In our last call, we are talking about situationships. And I was like, well, the moment you start going on the healing journey, you dissolve them. The situationships don't exist because the narcissist has to feed on someone that's got no boundaries. They can't go for another narcissist. How's that going to work? They need someone who's got flexible or no boundaries. And so the people pleaser is the greatest target for a narcissist, right? And so the people pleaser can spend their whole life blaming the other person and thinking, and for this is not to say that abuse is acceptable because it's definitely not. But it's disempowering to continue the story for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years that I am this way because of the other person. That means that you give all your power away, and that means you can't change without them changing. It's not a good story. So phase one, whenever I work with someone, is the details aren't that important. I need to know what part they're playing in their own suffering. What is their role? Because everyone has got a PhD and a degree in what everyone else is doing wrong. But it's very, very difficult to understand what your role is. It's like, a lot of people go and they stand in the bathroom, they look in the mirror and they see mud on their nose, but they spend 20 years cleaning the mirror because they think the mud is in the reflection. But they
I
don't.
love your metaphors.
Me too. It's how I learn. It's the only way I learn. But they spend so much time cleaning the mirror, not realizing that the mud is on their nose. And if they just cleaned the mud off their nose, the reflection would go clear, right? So the first stage of any transformation is awareness in your own role, in your own suffering. And until I had a good hard look at myself and not blame the profession, the color of the hair, the nationality, all those sort of things, until I had a look at what I was doing and really understood my patterns, only then, which is stage two, could I have the courage to change my behavior in real time? Because that's all that's required. That's it. You got to know what you're doing wrong, and then you got to have the courage to change your behavior. Everything else will fall into line. Everything else. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. The problem is people are so addicted to these unhealthy dynamics. They're so addicted to the people who can't give them what they need. And just the thought of being vulnerable risks the other person leaving, and they will leave because they won't be able to handle deep, vulnerable connections. That's not why they're there. They are there because there is an absence of it. That's what they're attracted to. They can hide if there's no
Yeah.
vulnerability, right? And so the hardest part about someone's own transformation is one, to really identify the patterns that they're playing. And number two, do I have the courage to change how I show up? And it's always leading with vulnerability. And when you do that, everything else will change externally. Remember, the ancient African proverb says, when there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm, right? When you
That is
start
a good one.
when you start transforming what's happening internally for you under the surface, your whole environment, everything externally will change. The mirror changes.
That is a good one. I'm I'm taking all these mental notes. And how long does like when you work with somebody, does this take like 6 months for them to make this full transformation? Like it seems like it takes a while. So how long does it normally take for something like
It
this
really,
to
it really,
change?
dep- it really depends on each person. But I used to only work with people for 3 months. I'm not a therapist. I don't expect you to pay my mortgage for the next 6 years. trying to work on the same thing. And there's a place for therapy. I've got incredible therapists who I refer a lot of people to, depending on what's required. But for me, the sweet spot was 6 weeks. If someone is ready, like if they're on their knees and they're like, enough is enough, I can't do this anymore. 6 weeks is the sweet spot. 4 weeks is enough time for me to build a safe and secure relationship with them where they feel like they can trust me and everything is all good. And then we just need to go quickly. And they'll see significant change within 6 weeks.
Wow. That it's wild to think that, I went through years and years, and maybe people can relate to this as well. Like going so long, through college, through, my early career, all these things, and understanding that maybe 6 weeks could have
Yeah, but that's not saying
reframed it a little
of
bit,
course. Listen, when I've been in therapy, I was in therapy for years as well, but specific therapists, ones that's not just talk therapy. I can't stand talk therapy because a lot of the time it just reinforces bad patterns and behaviors, right? Keeps you stuck as a victim. But a lot of the time you have to go on the journey until you find that one thing that changes it quickly, right? If someone's suffering from anxiety, I was talking to someone, coaching someone last week, debilitating anxiety, been in therapy for 10, 15 years, like a very long time. I'm like, well, how's that happen? How's that helping you? She's like, well, we're making progress. I'm like, well, are you? Are you really? You got to change now because change the tool, go to NLP, go to NAM. I know there's a different sort of therapy. Go to somatic work, do something because you're going to hit one spot, everything will change like that. But, it's the famous saying, it takes 40 years to become an overnight success. And the same thing happens. I had to go to therapy for a long time for things to change overnight when I understood attachment theory and was introduced to it. So did everything change overnight or did it take me 10 years to get to that one point? So I'm not by any chance saying I can transform things overnight, but a lot of the time it happens because I will pick from 10 different modalities depending on what the person needs. And sometimes if you understand patterns on a deep level and I can get enough leverage to force them to change, they'll change. Look, there's one of my favorite stories is you ask someone, can anyone change? Can you get anyone to change? And most people say, well, not really, because if they don't want to change, they're not going to change. Well, I was speaking to this guy a couple months ago. We're having a conversation and someone he knew was a big smoker, smoked for 40 years. 40 years. All of a sudden he goes to a doctor and a doctor says, you have cancer. He stopped smoking overnight. Now, was the cancer there 20 minutes before he spoke to the doctor? Yeah, of course it was. So what changed? The doctor had enough leverage. He had leverage over that person, right? Nothing. What really changed? He said 3 words, you have cancer. So when someone identifies their patterns and knows why they're stuck and knows why they're suffering, it's very predictable. And then all you need is leverage. And if there's enough leverage, people can change quickly.
That's fantastic. And it makes me feel a little bit better. Like all of what I was all of what I was doing beforehand, was kind of setting the stage for, the change that I needed.
Exactly. And I don't want to make you feel bad because that's what I'm saying. Like, the bamboo tree, you plant it in the ground, you create the right environment, you give it water, manure, sunlight, all the good things. In 3 years, you don't see anything, but all of a sudden it can grow like 1 meter in 24 hours. So which one was it? Did it take 3 years or did it take 24 hours to grow a meter?
Yeah, it was like the foundation was building. It was like
the foundation. I just think that people that they accept that things can't change. They stay stuck in their pain. They stay with the same mentor, the same therapist, or they don't do anything about it. And it becomes very difficult. Like the whole process is very drawn out. But if you find someone, like if you hurt your back, you can go to a physiotherapist for, 10 years and not make any change. But then you can go to a sports scientist, a strength and conditioning coach, or you go to someone who does Tai Chi or martial arts, a different modality, and you can change quickly, right? Depending on the situation. But that's why I'm a big believer in you need to interview the person who you're hiring. You need to ask them, okay, so I am single and I cannot get a relationship. How many people have you helped in my situation? What is the percentage of success rate that you can offer me? And how much do you charge? And then you can weigh up the options and say, okay, this guy's done it 150 times and he's running at 80% and he reckons in 6 weeks, And so then you have to go with that. But I think people, especially they come to me with like 2 or 3 therapists and they've been in therapy for 10, 20 years. They've got 150 labels. And I'm thinking, mate, you keep turning left in life and walking straight into the wall. And then you get yourself back up, you keep walking, you turn left, walk into the wall again. And they come to me, I'm like, are you ready to turn right? Because you keep walking into the wall when you turn left.
And it's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over,
Hello
expecting a
again.
different outcome. There was one thing that you mentioned probably 15 minutes ago that I wanted to touch on, and it was being stuck on the details. And we had talked about this on our first call, so I really wanted to bring it back to the forefront of like, you and I both had similar journeys on this as well, where, we were looking to change the external or like the details of
Mhm.
who we were looking for. So, when I was younger, it was like, well, I need someone who is like financially successful. I need someone who is 6'2". I need someone who has brown hair. I need someone who, goes to the gym, like all of these little details.
Yeah.
And then I would find that and I'd be like, well, they're not really nice to people. Or, they find the gym way more important than our relationship or, all of these little things. And so moving into, I feel like this season of my like healing life,
Mhm.
it's more like I want someone who, and we talked about this, can understand my need for entrepreneurship, who
Mhm.
can like meet my love languages, who can, likes being a go-getter, like things like that versus
Yeah.
the details. And I kind of want your expertise on what that shift is, like how you go from going to the details of who you need to be with
Yeah.
to like the larger picture.
Focusing on the details is an avoidance strategy. And
You're just reassuring what I am.
it's protecting you. And the moment you realize that, the details are irrelevant. I told you in our last conversation that the longest journey a human can go through is from the head to the heart. It's the hardest and the longest journey a human being can go through. Everyone comes to me and focuses on the details, and they say to me, my story's unique. Let me tell you when I met them and how it went, and all the details. But the details aren't that important because the patterns are so, so, so predictable. And whenever you're focused on the details, on what's happening, you're avoiding what's happening under the surface, why it's happening. What are you avoiding? And so the number one question I ask every single person, or like maybe not directly or indirectly, what are you avoiding? Because when you're so focused on the other person, when you're focused on the details, when you like have perfected the story of why the relationship's not working, why that person left, you're avoiding something. What are you avoiding? And when you get to that, you get to the heart of the matter, which is the vulnerability piece. If you could sum up my work in one sentence, it's vulnerability. That's it. I get so many men who come to me and, tied back into their social media story. They listen to the Andrew Tates and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not here to commentate on other people, but the message is to become more avoidant. They condition men to become more avoidant. The army conditions men to become more highly avoidant. You can't have emotions if you're a soldier. You will literally get yourself killed, right? And these guys, these influencers treat men like soldiers. Essentially, they're a soldier against the government, against the matrix, against all these things. And in order to be a soldier, well, you're going to war. If you're going to war, you can't be emotional, right? You got to get that shit down. You got to beat it out of you. And unfortunately, we have a society that rewards severe avoidance and narcissism. Go look at every prime minister and politician and president around the world. You won't find one who's deeply emotionally available or connected. They have to be narcissistic. They have to be severely avoidant on many different aspects, because if they start getting emotional on anything, they're going to, not going to make great decisions and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's debatable. I think they'll make better decisions, but you can see that society as a whole, success is given to those who can disconnect from their emotions, disconnect from their vulnerability, disconnect from themselves. And it's not a great position to be in. I forgot your question.
I forgot it too. Let me
Okay.
think.
So we both forgot. That's okay.
Yeah, no, we both forgot
Ah,
it.
the details. The details.
Yes, yes. And I think you did answer it where it was like, you have to like, one, ask yourself why, and then what
Hmm.
you're avoiding are like the
Yeah.
two biggest things. It's like, why are you doing what you're doing? And why are you doing that to avoid
What are you scared
insert
of?
blank? Yeah.
What are you scared of? You deal with the, it's like everything that your body does, your nervous system does, it does it for a reason. It's working for you. It's not working against you. It's working for you. But it creates issues because what worked for you 20 years ago is not working for you anymore, but it still thinks it's working for you. It's like you were talking about freezing before and kind of going offline. And when a deer walks across the road, and there's that saying, a deer in the headlights, when it walks across the road and a car is coming and it goes and it's like a deer in the headlights. It freezes. What's happening in that moment is it's shutting off all its organs and its vital signs to prepare to be hit, to prepare to be hurt, so it doesn't hurt as much. The avoidant attachers do the same thing. They go offline, they shut down when there's conflict, disagreements, whatever. Deer in the headlights, it's too much. It's like you talking to a wall because their system is preparing to get significantly hurt. When you see that, you'll realize the beauty in everything and that your system's working for you, but it's an outdated system because you're not at risk anymore, right? You're an adult. You have more resources, more tools, more support. You're very different. You're not a child. You don't depend on someone for your survival anymore.
And I think that just made the connection for me of like where you said your nervous system's working for you, or it thinks it's working for you, but it's the same nervous system from when you were a baby. So it's like the, age-old thing of retraining your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly why. Like, you need to bring your nervous system along with you in these new chapters of your life. And, as much as you can be successful, as much as you can be physically fit, you can be healed and healthy and secure. If your nervous system isn't there, like if your nervous system isn't a part of your healing journey, it's going to try to derail you at any point it can. So that for me was like, oh, wow, retraining your nervous system is actually, that's why.
Of course. And, every person's split down the middle. There's always conflict, especially if you have deep insecurities. There's a part of you who wants to make this relationship work with your partner, and you want to be there and you want to stick in it, but then things happen and there's a part of you that wants to run away and not make it work. And these two are at conflict with each other and cause resistance. And so the goal is to know when one shows up and realize that they're both working for you. How can I get them both on the same page? It's like having two children. One wants to do this thing, one wants to do this thing. And how can you get them both on the same page and working together as a unit? And when you do that with yourself, you start to integrate, and relationships aren't pushing and pulling and, I've got to do this and then I've got to do that. And it's an exhausting roller coaster. Instead, you see everything for what it is and you can act authentically. And you're okay with risk. You're okay with the results. You're okay with whatever your partner does or doesn't do because you've done the work internally and there's no more enemies with him. There's no more internal conflict. And this ties back into what we're saying. Relationships are the greatest mirror ever. And I know that's cliche, but people don't see it like that. They know it intellectually, but this is not an intellectual sport. It's an emotional sport. If it was an intellectual sport, I could read the book Attached and I could be healed. No? But it's not. It's an emotional sport. So what's happening emotionally for me? How can I get myself on the same page? How can I resolve the conflict internally? And how can I make different decisions moving forward and just be me, authentic me, not the survival strategy me, not the protection strategy me, not the me who puts the walls and the facades and the masks. No, behind all of that, there is a soft, beautiful, warm, loving human being who just wants to connect, who wants to love and be loved. How can I let that out? Kind of like a turtle. It's the hard shell that keeps it safe, but there's no more predators for us anymore. We're okay. We're going to be okay.
Yeah. For me, it was having the foundation. We talked about this earlier, is like having the foundation that I don't think I necessarily had going into previous relationships, where I was like, I need this foundation so that when I do take that kind of like leap of faith, I stick my neck out there. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't affect my foundation.
Yeah.
It's like, this is an extension. As much as, you want relationships to work and you don't want to get hurt, it's like, it won't affect the core of who I am. It's like, it's going to be awful. I'm going to have a period of sadness and rebuilding and, reflection, but it's not going to like rock me to my core, so to speak. And that was like my personal journey of being like, okay, I think I'm ready to stick my neck out a little bit because I'm good over here.
Yeah, it's a process. You have to go on that journey and allow for your humanness to shine through because it is risky, especially when you've been through difficult things in life and, experienced traumas and all the good stuff. It's difficult, but it's a journey well worth taking because it is a lonely road without vulnerability, without being authentic, without being you. It's lonely because you're kind of trying to connect behind all these walls, and the anxious is exactly the same in that sense to the avoidant attachers. They're both doing the same thing. They just manifest in different ways. And so the journey is to get behind the wall and show who you are. And the beauty about this journey is that you want people to reject you. You want them to deselect themselves when you are yourself, because that will show you exactly who has the capacity to be in a relationship with you, who has the capacity to be there for you, and who doesn't. But if you don't do that, you'll never know. And people ask me all the time, how can I go on a date and see if someone's avoidant or not. I'm like, you're asking the wrong question because you're asking, you know, you're trying to master the external as well. Again, you're trying to master the external. The question is, how can I be me behind all the shit in me? And when I am, people will leave me and people will stay. And that's the best position that you can be in. Everything else will work out. When you're dating, in a relationship, everything will fall into place, even in business.
Yep. Rejection is protection.
Rejection is redirection
Redirection. I like that one.
and deselection.
Yes. Yeah. Because I'm very happy that I'm not with, every other person prior. Because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
where would my life have been after? Would have been that same kind of toxic relationship. But I know we're at time, and
Mhm.
it is now 3:00 in the afternoon where you are.
It is, yeah.
It is 8:00 in the morning where I am. I'm going to start getting ready for baseball. But I would love to hear any closing thoughts that you might have. I know we just had a real zinger, but I want people to know where they can get a hold of you, where they can find you, how they can book a consultation with you. Give me all the details on you and where people can start changing their lives.
The best place to find me is on Instagram, Dean Blankfield. You can book a call there. You can message me. I'm very responsive. I love to get back to people as soon as I can. And what can I leave you with? That's a good question. I think that no matter what you're going through, and no matter how hard and painful it might be, you are so close to changing everything, and people don't realize how close they are. It's kind of like the guy digging for gold, and he digs like 10 meters underground and he stops, not knowing that he's an inch away from hitting the gold mine. And so it may seem like it's the end. It may seem like you're never going to find someone who's so amazing again. But I think if you have the belief that everything is happening for a reason, everything is happening for your benefit, and everything can get better, you adopt those three beliefs and you're going to be fine because you are closer than you think.
But again, just so many nuggets. I hope that everybody was taking notes or is saving this episode because this is one you really do not want to miss. There are so many one-liners. There are so many nuggets of information. Dean, thank you so much for being on Love in the Wild. I was drawn to your page for this exact reason. Your metaphors, your insight are truly life-changing. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and everybody go follow Dean.
Thank you so much for having me. Always great to connect with you, and I'm happy that our paths crossed. Thank you, Caitlin.